9 minutes into battle, Chansey hits the field against Mega Gengar and immediately establishes itself as a threat. The use of Calm Mind shows that this Pokemon is now a ticking time bomb, and Gengar is completely helpless in stopping it. 2 more Calm Minds later, Chansey unleashes its first attack, and now things are really interesting, because that actually wasn't a crazy amount of damage for a Pokemon that has been stat boosting so much. However, what this does show is that Chansey now has no instant KO potential against the Gengar. And this is because of how stat boosting works in Pokemon, so I want to give a quick breakdown of the mechanics behind this. A Pokemon can only gain 6 stages in a specific stat. Now, certain moves boost the amount of stages by different amounts. So if you use Calm Mind, that's going to give you +1 to your special attack and +1 to your special defense. And since it's a plus, it just keeps on adding up. So by 3 Calm Minds, we are now at +3 in the stat breakdown, meaning Chansey is doing 250% more damage, or just 2.5 times more damage. However, we can see something interesting happening here. That if we go from +3 to +6, even though we're doubling the amount of boost that we're doing, it's only giving us 60% more damage because there's diminishing returns. So technically, if you're at a +2 and you hit your opponent twice, it's the same as going to +6 and hitting them once, which means that certain stat boosting needs to be taken into consideration for different battles and stuff like that. But generally, when you're a low damage output tank Pokemon like Chansey, you want to get as many stats as possible and just hope you have enough damage behind it. So what this shows is that even if Chansey goes to +6, Gengar can't get one-hit KO'd except through a crit, but also because of a previous Leech Seed, Chansey is now giving back Gengar almost all of the health that it's dealing in damage. And then a little bit of burn means that Gengar is only taking about 13 damage, little less than 10% of its health. It's going to be fine, but that brings us to another problem. The match time. That, sure, if we had an indefinite amount of time, eventually Chansey would run out of Soft Boiled and eventually run out of Flamethrower, and then it would be completely useless, meaning that my last Pokemon can do something about that. But with only 7 minutes to go, we certainly don't have enough time, and I'm in a Pokemon deficit, which means when all that time runs out, game's over. So I need to do something drastic, and that's where Articuno comes into play. How can Articuno survive if it's going to be a super effective move from a boosted Chansey, and by the time Articuno hits the field, Chansey has gained 2 more Calm Minds. So now we're dealing with a +5, 3.5 times damage, super effective move onto the Articuno, and Articuno actually didn't seem to care at all. Articuno was able to tank that hit, Mirror Coat it back, and then KO the Chansey off the damage Chansey has taken from the Leech Seed and the burn. What does this mean? It means Articuno is incredible. And here's Articuno taking an Ice Punch from Mega Kangaskhan like it's nothing. Now I know what you guys are probably thinking, well yeah, it's just a neutral move and it doesn't have the same type attack bonus, otherwise known as stab, so of course it's not going to do that much damage. But I mean, double it. Say that was a Thunder Punch, or say that was a Fire Punch. Still not an insane amount, and even if that was coming from an Electric type Pokemon with higher attack, Articuno still survives it pretty well. And the weird thing about Kangaskhan is Kangaskhan in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee doesn't really have too many good same type attack options. That Return is not in the game at all, Mega Punch has low accuracy, and Dizzy Punch is slightly less power than the Ice Punch at 70. So even doing 45% more damage to the Articuno still doesn't really threaten the Articuno at all. That just kind of shows how tanky the Articuno is. Well, what about Sweeper using a special attack? Here's what happens when Starmie uses Thunderbolt. Very bad things end up happening to the Starmie, and Articuno still doesn't even lose half of its health. That's nutty. Duggan just using a strong water type move in the waterfall also doesn't stand a chance. Articuno can pretty much just take hits for days and not really seem to care about it. Okay, what about Alakazam? Let's take a real Pokemon with real stats, having it use a real move like Psychic, and Articuno's fine, and it can still use that Mirror Coat and just blow up the opponent. Even if Alakazam had a little bit of stat boosting in it, Articuno could still find a way to turn that around. And then maybe one of the craziest things my Articuno's ever done is survive an Alolan Sandslash with missing health. Now, that might not sound like that much of an achievement, but this Sandslash had already used Swords Dance twice, which means it was at +4 or doing 3 times damage, and it had priority, so I couldn't do any shenanigans like Roost to nullify the weakness from the Flying type against the Ice Shard. So I was just going to be taking neutral, solid Ice Shards from a pretty powerful Pokemon at that time, and Articuno was doing it just fine. Ice Beam also does a very surprising amount of damage. That is quad resist, and it was finally able to pick up the KO onto the Alolan Sandslash. So yeah, Articuno is pretty strong. This Pokemon, I decided to use it because I liked its stats, and it turns out that it's just a lot stronger than anyone would give it credit for. But let's talk about those stats. So in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, there's really no such thing as effort values. You can do candy stat boosting, but that doesn't really count on the normal battles, so a Pokemon is as strong as its raw stats. There's also no abilities, no items, can't really pull any shenanigans, and a moveset is also very important. So Articuno really benefits from this in a crazy way. That 90 hit points, 100 defense, 125 special defense is insanely tanky for the format when the opponent can't invest into special attack with effort values or use something like a Choice Specs, Life Orb, or anything. Even in any Pokemon, investing into any offensive stat isn't going to be able to do that, so Articuno does get to feel that tankiness in response. Also, 95 special attack might not sound like a lot, but it works the other way. If there were EVs in play, if there were like normal mechanics involved, Articuno would want something like a Leftovers, and then it would go for defensive investment, leaving that special attack just to kind of fall behind. So a Pokemon putting effort values in that special attack is going to really separate the distance between Articuno's power and that Pokemon's power. Now in Pokemon Let's Go, so a 95 special attack is actually pretty good when a Pokemon can't invest in defense, doesn't have any items or abilities to nullify that damage, and is now closer to being a sweeper than ever before. Now, the next thought might be, yeah, that's cool and all, but Articuno is still a trash Pokemon because of Stealth Rocks. That when Stealth Rocks is up, Articuno loses half of its health upon entering the battlefield. Well, I mean, as we just showed from those damage calculations, Articuno, it's really hard to do more than Articuno, like half of Articuno's health in a single hit. So depending on Articuno's situation, the Pokemon's going up against, if you bring it in at an opportune time, it can just roost back up to full or roost back up to a very comfortable spot and then immediately impose its will against the opponent. Even though there isn't a way to remove Stealth Rocks, you either play to get around it or you just play against it. That if you see your opponent setting up Stealth Rocks, you set up with a different Pokemon and then use that Pokemon to win the game because the opponent tried to throw away the game on Stealth Rocks. Stealth Rocks is a really bad move, guys. Another cool thing to Articuno's strength is that Ice Beam will one-hit KO a Dugtrio. Makes sense because that's a super effective move, but Dugtrio's faster Rock Slide does not KO the Articuno. A 4 times super effective move from a 100 attack Pokemon is not enough to KO. So you will need a stab boosted Rock Slide from the opponent. Also, Stone Edge is not in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, so Articuno is very safe except for against Pokemon like Rhydon, Aerodactyl, just things that are going to hurt it really hard. And unfortunately, the Ice Beam does not one-hit KO the Rhydon when you're an Articuno. But I mean, still, like, that's impressive. That unboosted special attack Ice Beam still works against a lot of threats, and those threats don't even have super crazy KOs outright against you. And with that, you're still at 30% health, you can take a weaker hit, and then roost it back up, and now Articuno is going to be annoying again. So this Pokemon is really tough to take out, except with stab boosted Rock Slide, a super effective follow-up from an immediate Stealth Rocks entry, or just a Flare Blitz. But Articuno can survive almost anything else. Really, the only thing holding Articuno back is its moveset, because it doesn't learn a lot in Pokemon Let's Go like many other Pokemon, and its options are very straightforward. You might have seen my moveset by now, and I feel like this is pretty much the only way you can run Articuno in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. So it's really strong, but it's also really predictable. You know, it's going to be incredible against opponents that have no idea what it's going to do. You Mirror Coat a super effective hit they think KOs you, and then that's going to be a free KO and potentially just a free win right there. But now that the information's out there, I think it's still really, really good, because these opponents, they watch the streams, they watch this Articuno, they battle me, they know my playstyle, and Articuno is still able to find an advantage despite my heavy disadvantage inside of that. Toxic means you can stall forever with Roost, Ice Beam, as we've shown, is solid damage, and Mirror Coat responds to special threats. Now, physical Pokemon coming in, if they are weak to the Ice Beam, that's just going to be some pretty awesome stuff. Now, as for some other moveset options on the Articuno, I have seen the Substitute very recently, and it was initially threatening, but it doesn't make the Articuno have that offensive threat as much, and eventually you can wear down the Substitute, you can find a way through the Pokemon. If somehow you break down the sub, get a status on Articuno, it's going to be in a really bad position, but by losing out on one of your moves, not having Ice Beam, well, that's just offensive pressure, so you can't really get rid of that. Not having Mirror Coat, which does make sense, so like swapping out Mirror Coat for the Substitute is good, but it also means that your Articuno doesn't have like those instant wreckages against some of the opponent's strongest Pokemon, which I feel is what makes Articuno strong of a threat as it is, and doing Substall with just Ice Beam means, you know, certain Pokemon can come in and tank you out, or just not really care about your Ice Beam damage, and that means special attackers now get to run you over and eventually just beat you out. That Starmie is going to have a much better time when all you can do is Ice Beam it for no damage, all you can do is Toxic it for damage that isn't going to add up in enough time, and then Thunderbolt breaks Sub, Thunderbolt does a lot of damage, you use Sub again or Roost, and eventually you just die. So I feel that against special attackers, the substitute really kind of falls apart. It's kind of like a good anti-stall, but if that sub gets through, if a quicker Toxic lands on it, your Articuno's done. U-turn. Well, because of Stealth Rocks, you don't want to work so hard to get your Articuno in, then immediately bounce out for physical, non-stab damage on a non-physical attacker. There's really no reason to have U-turn on the Articuno at all. I think I've seen it like once, and it was just a really bad idea. Like, using it as a Pokemon switch in, Roost, U-turn out, it's not really worth the damage, and Articuno is just really strong on its own. And then Blizzard is like the only offensive option you can use, but after the nerf to the really powerful moves like Blizzard, Fire Blast, Thunder, it's just not that great. 70% accuracy doesn't really bring too much to the table. You're just going to want the higher PP and more persistent damage of the Ice Beam, and then yeah, Articuno really doesn't have much else going for it. Reflect can be used kind of like a substitute, but you do have to give up something, and then that's going to make you very weak. So overall, the most balanced Articuno is the one I've seen. You can Ice Beam down Pokemon that you can't Toxic, you have Mirror Coat for the special attackers, and then everything else you can just Toxic Stall, and you're not really worried about the damage either. And also, one thing I kind of noticed with the Articuno against the substitute is that some moves will just do like 25%. So sub lasts only once. It's sub Roost. As you're roosting, the sub breaks from the damage, and then that gives the sweeper an opportunity or something like that. So there we go, guys. That's what makes Articuno a beast in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. That even though it has a limited move pool, it has the right moves and it has the right tech to be very threatening. Its stats in the game are perfect when there are no items and abilities and all kinds of like other moves that have been removed from the game. So it just turns out to be a really strong Pokemon, even though people like that play Smogon or people that don't really know Pokemon, they just think they're over competitive. They just look at the stupid on paper stuff, well, like, oh, Stealth Rocks is busted, so Articuno is bad, when really, Articuno is one of the best Pokemon that exists in Pokemon Let's Go. So you guys, enjoy the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.